But basically, economists and policy folks like competition because it produces better efficiency, which is that we make the stuff we want more efficiently. We use fewer resources to produce what we need as a country, as an economy. And there's two kinds of efficiencies that they talk about, so-called static efficiencies and dynamic efficiencies. I won't belabor them, but just the distinction is that a static efficiency is what you can do in the short term without changing over your capital. You can remove a few light bulbs or change a few light bulbs, and you can do what you can do. Dynamic efficiency is when the capital turns over, when you redo this building and put in a new heating, ventilating, and air conditioning system, you have a whole lot more opportunities, relamping, and all that kind of stuff. And really, in the electric business, in the economy as a whole, dynamic efficiencies is really where the big benefits are. You know, the thing that a market economy does well is allocates capital. Okay, if you just think about that, globally. I have an anecdote from the old Soviet Union. I have a friend who used to do some work over there in Ukraine, and he had to change planes in Moscow and go from the Moscow International Airport to the Moscow Domestic Airport to fly to Ukraine. And about the third time, he asked his drivers, they drove back past this enormous facility, this big, big building. He said, "What is that?" And his driver said, "That is the Greater Moscow Car Repair Facility." And you sit there and say, why would you have one for a whole city? And yet that was the sort of the central planning mentality. The allocation of capital said, must be economies of scale in car repair. Let's have one big one as opposed to one on every street corner. So this is ubiquitous phenomena that we're talking about, capital allocation and having markets allocated as opposed to governments or central planning or regulation. And I think if you think about the electric utility business, it's on the capital-intensive side of the scale of industries, not like the consulting business, for instance, but you actually have to invest money to make things. And so you would think going in that it would make a difference. Capital allocation would make a difference in the electric business. And if you thought that, you would be right. If you look at the left side of this page, this is how things looked to people in the 70s. The left side of this page is that Frank was just describing. We had an embedded cost structure for everything that had been built up until that period of time that looked pretty reasonable. And we had fears that the next increment was going to be much higher after the oil embargo, after the 3 Mile Island. We thought, oh my goodness, our marginal costs are higher than our embedded costs. And a whole bunch of policies flowed from that, and a whole bunch of planning flowed from that. And by the way, we were pretty sure we knew what we were doing, right? As Frank recounted, load was going to grow at 7% a year. Oil was going to go to $100 a barrel. Natural gas was too valuable to be used, et cetera. The right-hand side of the page is how it turned out. How it turned out is we drove our embedded costs, as Frank and Bill both talked about, for whom customers were responsible. We drove them up quite significantly, quite successfully, and the market price was down because load didn't grow at 7% a year. Natural gas didn't turn out to be too valuable. It turned out to be cheap and plentiful for a while. Technological progress. Where was technological progress? It was in natural gas combustion technology, derivative from the airplane business, interestingly enough. And so the future turned out a whole lot differently than we were sure it was going to in the 70s. And the results are, as Frank summarized, that $200 billion number. So sort of the 70s story to the 80s is sort of proof of the hypothesis that you would expect that central planning might not allocate capital perfectly. Well, we did that once with lasting consequences. Well, how about competition? Since we've had competition, how is it done? And I won't belabor this page, but simply to say that if you go and look in the places where you can observe how competitive markets have performed in the time that they've been competitive, you get about what you would expect. You find evidence of these static efficiencies, and you find evidence of more importantly, of these dynamic efficiencies. And so you see that things are working as you would hope. Maybe not perfectly, maybe room for improvement, but we seem like the hypothesis that in a capital-intensive business, having competitive markets allocate the capital, we see some evidence that seems to be working pretty well in the large portions of the country where that model is in place.